Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started. We've said this before about war. It is not just about winning territory. It is also about political victories, about serving a political purpose. Look at the war in Ukraine. The West wanted to isolate Putin, bring him down. Russia wanted to stop NATO's expansion and assert its claim on Ukraine. Neither has won. But Russia is certainly ahead. Putin has weaponized oil and gas supplies, so much so that the West is diluting its own sanctions. Putin has also defeated Biden in West Asia. He struck important partnerships. Saudi Arabia now backs Russia. Iran too backs Russia. Iran has signed a $40 billion oil deal with Russia. It may also sell drones to Russia. Putin's visit to Tehran was a success. Compare that to Biden's recent visit to the region. It was a flop. What does this mean for the region and for Russia's role in it? On Gravitas tonight, we'll decode Putin's power play in West Asia. West Asia has had a busy week. First, Joe Biden landed with a to-do list. He made a mess of it and returned empty-handed. Then Vladimir Putin went to Iran. He played his cards better than Biden and he's returning with some big wins to Moscow. Putin secured a strategic partnership plus an energy deal. And that's something that Biden too came for, remember. He wanted an oil deal, but the Saudis refused. Putin, on the other hand, landed a $40 billion oil deal. And the big picture does not look good for Washington, D.C. Russia is far from being isolated, let alone being defeated. It is forging new partnerships. With Iran, Putin is creating a new anti-America axis. How will this help Russia? What impact will this have on West Asia and the world? And what role will Turkey play in this new game? We'll discuss all of this in the next few minutes. Starting with what Putin got from his visit to Iran. He made some significant breakthroughs. Let's tell you about the two big announcements that were made. Number one, Iran has backed Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Unlike China, Iran is not being cautious. It is not mincing its words. It has offered its full support to Putin. Let me tell you what Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei told Putin, and I'm quoting, "War is a violent and difficult issue, and the Islamic Republic is in no way happy that civilians get caught up in it. But concerning Ukraine, had you not taken the initiative, the other side would have taken the initiative and caused the war." The other side here being the NATO. So what Iran is saying is this: if Russia had not started the war, the NATO would have. And this is not surprising. Both Iran and Russia consider the West as their enemy. Both face tough Western sanctions. And in geopolitics, common enemies make great friends. The West has isolated both Iran and Russia. So Iran and Russia are now natural allies. Iran is supporting Russia's war on Ukraine. It has also struck a major oil deal with Russia, a deal worth $40 billion. It was signed during Putin's visit. What does the deal entail? Russia will help Iran set up more oil fields and gas projects. And this is significant given their history. Remember, Russia once colonized parts of northern Iran. Today, they've become strategic partners with an oil deal and possibly an arms deal too. The US says Russia wants to buy Iranian drones. The leaders did not mention it yesterday, but reports say Russia is seriously pursuing this deal, the drone deal with Iran. There is talk of a treaty on strategic cooperation. Tehran and Moscow want to further their relationship on three levels: regional affairs, security, and economics. Moving away from the use of the dollar is a priority for both sides. Russia and Iran could build their own banking mechanisms. So Putin has a lot to look forward to when it comes to Iran. We cannot say the same for Turkey, though. Why Turkey? Because their president was also in Tehran. We told you about the tripartite meeting yesterday. Erdogan also separately met the leaders of Russia and Iran. Putin's meeting with Erdogan was frosty, to say the least. Take a look at these images. This video is going viral. Erdogan made Vladimir Putin wait, and that's making quite a statement because it is Putin who has a reputation of making world leaders wait. Erdogan turned the tables on him. He made Putin wait for 50 seconds, which does not sound like very much. But the world can't stop talking about it, also because Putin himself looks so uncomfortable waiting. He was not prepared for this. Look at him. Journalists from around the world were in this room. As Putin waited for Erdogan, he stood in front of the chairs awkwardly, shifting his weight and fidgeting. And Putin's face, in fact, said it all. The cameras caught every bit of it. The journalists there zoomed in when Putin twitched his mouth. The impatience was evident. Now look at what happened when Erdogan turned up.
Hello.
A cold reception. What about the meeting? It yielded mixed results. Turkey has been mediating between Russia and Ukraine. Erdogan is trying to lift the blockade on Ukrainian wheat exports. There is some progress on that front, and Putin thanked Erdogan for that.
I would like to thank you for your mediation efforts, for providing a platform for negotiations on food issues, on issues of grain transportation over the Black Sea. We have moved forward thanks to your mediation. Not all the issues are resolved, but there is a movement forward, and that is good.
So there seems to be some broad agreement about Ukraine, but when Syria came up for discussion, tensions were once again on display. Russia supports the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad. Turkey is preparing to launch an attack. Later, Putin and Erdogan joined Iranian President Raisi for a trilateral meeting. And like I said, Turkey is planning a new military offensive in Syria. Erdogan wants an incursion into northern Syria. He wants to drive away Kurdish fighters from there. Russia and Iran do not like that plan. They warned Erdogan against it.
We emphasize that Syria's fate should be decided by its own people, through internal dialogue and without foreign intervention.
I'm confident that our countries will continue to practically reinforce the cooperation on complete liquidation of remaining hotbeds of international terrorism at the Syrian territory. It is necessary to end forever the presence of ISIS and other extremist groups in Syria.
What about Erdogan? The Turkish president is not backing down. He wants both Iran and Russia to support his offensive in Syria.
We see that the YPG terrorist organization is taking steps to consolidate the division in Syria with the foreign support it is receiving. It is impossible to expect Turkey to remain inactive, irresponsible, as this terrorist organization continues its separatist agenda. I hear from you, my dear friends, that you understand Turkey's legitimate security concerns. I am thankful for this, but words alone are not a cure for wounds.
Erdogan is talking about Turkey's legitimate concerns. Iran and Russia are also united in their concerns. They're creating a new axis, a new power center, which makes the chessboard in West Asia very interesting. Now listen to this carefully. Israel and Saudi Arabia are coming closer, but Israel and Iran are sworn enemies. Saudi Arabia and Iran have been enemies, but they're beginning to talk. Russia and Saudi Arabia are partners. And now Russia and Iran are also partners. It's like those logical reasoning questions you get in exams, and this is West Asia for you. Now, Iran is backing Russia and Ukraine. Saudi Arabia, too, is backing Russia. The Saudi foreign minister has spoken out. He has said that Russia is, quote-unquote, an integral part of OPEC+. That's the global alliance of major oil exporters, OPEC+. Riyadh says that without Russia, it would be impossible to ensure a steady oil supply. Where does that leave the US? Isolated, at least in this region. Biden wanted to make Putin a pariah, but in this part of the world, he seems to have lost both Saudi Arabia and Iran. Putin has won this round. And Putin's policy in Iran was unambiguous. He wants a stable, long-term relationship. But with Europe, it's the very opposite. Vladimir Putin wants to keep his Western neighbors guessing. How? By leveraging Russian energy. His comments in Tehran have triggered speculation. Putin did not threaten a complete shutdown, but he hinted at a reduction in supply. Listen to this.
Now 2 turbines are working, pumping 60 million cubic meters of gas a day. If one turbine comes, very well. There will be 2 turbines working. If it doesn't come, only one will be working. There will be only 30 million cubic meters a day. One should count how much can be pumped during the remaining half a year.
Now that sounds very technical. 1 turbine, 2 turbines, a lot of numbers. But beneath all of this is a threat. A subtle warning from the Russian president. He is talking about the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. It is the biggest subsea pipeline in the world. Its total capacity is almost 55 billion cubic meters per year. Now, last week, Nord Stream was closed for repair works. Russia said it will be reopened on Thursday. Europe fears that Russia is bluffing, that the pipeline will not be reopened. So what does Putin do? He adds fuel to the fire. On the one hand, Putin is threatening a supply cut. At the same time, his officials say something very different. Take a look at this report. It says Gazprom will resume pumping gas on Thursday. The company has not said so publicly, but their officials have confirmed it off the record. Now, here's the question. Can Europe rely on these unconfirmed reports? We are talking about gas supplies for millions of Europeans. Their food, their fuel, all of it depends on the Nord Stream pipeline. So Europe cannot take a chance here. They must prepare irrespective of what Russia does. Earlier today, the European Commission unveiled a plan. It's called Save Gas for a Safe Winter. Full marks for the name. Pretty much explains itself. Save gas for a safe winter. Europe's plan is to build up gas reserves before winter comes, to create a buffer stock. And how will they do that? By reducing gas usage.
Russia is blackmailing us. Russia is using energy as a weapon. And therefore, in any event, whether it's a partial, major cutoff of Russian gas or a total cutoff of Russian gas, Europe needs to be ready.
The Commission's proposal has 2 parts. One is a voluntary cut. European countries must reduce gas usage by 15%. This will in fact not be legally enforced. It depends on what the member states decide. Part 2 is a mandatory cut, and this would apply only if there is a gas emergency. For example, if the Nord Stream does not reopen, or if the energy stocks fall to dangerous levels. In that case, Brussels will get extra powers. It can legally enforce the gas cuts. That is the EU's plan. How long would this rationing last? From August 2022 to March 2023, which means throughout the winter. It's a desperate intervention by the European Commission. But right now, it's just a proposal. On the 26th of July, Europe's energy ministers will be holding an emergency meeting. If they approve this proposal, the gas cuts will go ahead. If not, Europe will remain at Russia's mercy. Which brings us to their permanent problem. Will the member states agree to these cuts? Some of them will. For example, Hungary's gas storage is only 47% full, so they need to conserve gas. But Poland's storage is 98% full. So why would Poland implement gas cuts when they have enough gas? Why would their citizens agree to rationing? And this will be a big problem for Europe. To survive the winter, they need to act in solidarity. They need to share the burden. Else, they must get off the high horse, tweak their sanctions to keep using Russian energy. And that's nothing new for the West. They have consistently undermined their own sanctions as and when it suits them. I'll give you 2 examples. You just heard Putin talking about 2 turbines of the Nord Stream pipeline. He said one of them may not come. Why is that? Because that turbine was in Canada. It was being repaired in a Canadian factory. Now, technically, Russia should not get this turbine back because turbines are part of Western sanctions. And going by those sanctions, Canada cannot return the turbine to Russia. But Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada is doing it anyway. This Sunday, he sent the turbine back to Russia. It's on its way. And it's a clear violation of Canada's own sanctions. But you see, nobody is lecturing Canada for violating the sanctions. Now, the second example. The European Union is unfreezing the assets of top Russian banks, not the whole thing, but certain parts of their assets. And what is their justification? Europe says this move could ease the food and fertilizer bottlenecks, basically boost the supply chains. So yet again, sanctions are being diluted because Europe wants it, because Europe is feeling the pinch. Just think about it. Look at the contrast. African nations raised the alarm back in the month of May. They complained against the rising food and fuel prices. They had no luck. Last month in June, they asked Europe to reconsider the sanctions to make food payments to Russia easier. Again, no luck. But now Brussels has finally woken up. Why do you think that is? Because their own food and fuel prices are out of control now. Inflation has topped 8.6% in the bloc. So what does Europe do? They dilute their own sanctions. Same with the United States. In April this year, the G20 finance ministers held a meeting in Washington, D.C. The U.S. was represented by Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. She led a Western boycott of Russia. She walked out when the Russian officials started speaking. Cut to July. Things have changed. G20 finance minister met again in Bali. This time, Yellen did not walk out. Neither did any of the European finance ministers. What does all of this tell you? The West was fine with sanctions as long as they were insulated, as long as their economies were not being punished. But once the crisis hit home, their attitude changed. Putin was counting on this when he invaded Ukraine, and from the looks of it, he was right. Russia's war on Ukraine has spooked Europe. 5 months and counting, the Russian war machine is still rolling on. The ruble remains strong. Russia has found new partners to do business with, but Europe has not been able to find enough alternatives to source energy. So now they're preparing for the worst case scenario, the war spilling over. Europe is arming itself. The European Union has made a proposal. It talks about a joint weapon purchase plan. Basically, they want to buy weapons as a group, as a union. The proposal is worth more than $500 million. This money will be drawn from the EU budget. The European Union has a small budget. It was close to about $150 billion in 2019, and this is barely 2% of the combined national budgets of member countries. So they will draw money from this pool, from this budget. And with this money, they'll buy ammunition, like light and heavy artillery, anti-aircraft weapons, armored vehicles, anti-tank defense systems, all sorts of things. The EU foreign policy chief says this is required because the war in Ukraine is going to continue.
The war will continue. We'll continue supporting. And that's why I have proposed the next tranche of the European Peace Facility, allocating 500 million more. It has been a political agreement on supporting this proposal. And the decision will be taken on the next days, but today the ministers agreed on that.
What kind of military shortages are European nations facing? EU officials have declined to answer that question. They say they cannot due to security reasons. But here's what the EU foreign policy chief was quoted as saying. And let me repeat that. Since the euro crisis in 2008, Europe has gone through a kind of silent process of disarmament. We've been stripping ourselves of arms without saying it. We've reduced our military assets between 2008 and 2014 in a very shocking way. The war, in fact, has exposed Europe. It is not ready to face a military conflict. Weapon stockpiles are running low. They've struggled to source tanks, rocket launchers and artillery. Russia's invasion prompted them to boost defense spending. EU states have announced an increase of close to $200 billion, and this figure looks big. But it comes after years of cost-cutting on defense. In the last 20 years, the European Union's combined defense spending rose by just 20%. Compare that with the US, a rise of 66%. Russia, a rise of 292%, and China, 592%. So Europe's figures fall woefully short. They tried to make up in the last few years. Just before the Russian war, the war on Ukraine, Europe saw the biggest growth in arms imports globally. This report is based on a study by the Stockholm Institute. Between 2017 and 2021, arms imports to European states grew by 19%. These states accounted for 13% of the global arms transfers. One of the biggest shifts has been seen in Germany. It announced a €100 billion military modernization fund. Germany's first big purchase as part of this plan was the American-made F-35 fighter jet. It is capable of carrying nuclear weapons. In fact, this is expected to be the trend. Europe is looking at the world's biggest arms supplier to replenish stocks. Reports say American defense manufacturers stand to gain the most. And almost in tandem, the US State Department is said to have approved a $1.5 billion plan for weapons sales. These weapons will be sold to NATO allies, which includes most of Europe. Now, it's not clear if these weapons will be bought by member states or by the European Union jointly. And that's another area where Europe needs to work, this joint defense policy. The European Union has a defense budget. It was supposed to spend 35% of this budget on joint projects. In 2022, only 11% was spent jointly. What explains this gap? Politics. Member states in Europe want to control their defense policy. They don't want to surrender it to Brussels. Though on paper they do have a common policy and they're committed to that common policy. In fact, the EU launched such a policy back in the 1990s. The likes of Emmanuel Macron have been pushing for a European army. But none of it has seen progress. Perhaps Russia's war on Ukraine will prove to be the impetus for change. And that's the nature of politics. It's not about logic. It's a lot about circumstances. Being at the right place at the right time. The best example is Sri Lanka's new president, Ranil Wickremesinghe. The parliament has elected him to replace Gotabaya Rajapaksa. He will remain president till 2024. Not an acting president, not a caretaker, a full-fledged executive president of Sri Lanka. The eighth one. 134 out of Sri Lanka's 225 lawmakers voted for Ranil Wickremesinghe. His nearest rival got 82 votes. Wickremesinghe addressed the parliament soon after the vote. He asked the country to unite and talk. Listen in.
Now our divisions are over. We had 48 hours to be divided, and we were divided. Now I ask all of you to unite, and let's talk. I'm happy to start these talks with all of you from tomorrow.
It's a fairy tale for Wickremesinghe. Absolutely no one saw this coming. In the 2020 elections, remember, Wickremesinghe actually lost his seat. He had to enter parliament as a nationalist MP. So what does that mean? You see, Sri Lanka's parliament has two kinds of lawmakers. 196 MPs are elected directly by the people and 29 national list MPs are nominated. Wickremesinghe belonged to the second group, the national list members. He lost the elections, so he was pushed through the back door. 2 years later, he is the president of Sri Lanka. Like I said, it's all about timing. When Gotabaya Rajapaksa was looking for a prime minister, Wickremesinghe fit the bill. He was non-controversial, politically powerless and reform-minded. The perfect choice. When Gotabaya was toppled, Wickremesinghe also promised to quit. He seemed genuine about stepping aside. But the presidency was too big to pass up. Wickremesinghe did what politicians around the world do. He saw an opportunity and he pounced on it. The next question is, what happens next? The mood on the ground is somber. The protesters were expecting major changes. Instead, they got Wickremesinghe, a man who, according to some, sums up Sri Lanka's problematic establishment. You see, he's a 6-time prime minister. He's considered close to the Rajapaksas now. He's backed by the ruling SLPP party and he's tough on protesters. Just think about it. This is a man who lost a parliament election. His own constituents did not elect him, but now he's representing the whole country. So naturally, the protesters are not happy. They're planning to continue the demonstrations in Colombo.
We won't back down. We won't let this be. We won't settle for any less. Because at the same time, this is exactly what we're fighting for. We're fighting to not settle for any less, and to not be comfortable in the uncomfortable, but fight for what we deserve. And the people deserve to get their basic necessities.
Wickremesinghe's next moves will be crucial. As acting president, he declared an emergency. He called the protesters fascists. That kind of attitude could lead to more backlash, more protests against him. So Wickremesinghe needs to focus on two things: political reconciliation and economic revival. And the second one will take time, economic revival. Sri Lanka's talks with the IMF are nearing conclusion. Once a bailout agreement is reached, things will improve. They're expected to improve. Sri Lanka can begin its long and painful recovery. But what about the political reconciliation? That's the big worry for Wickremesinghe. Most of his support came from SLPP lawmakers, from the party of the Rajapaksas. We all know why they voted for him. You could call it a revenge strategy. Let me explain. The protesters toppled the Rajapaksas and their cabinet. The opposition is sympathetic to them, the protesters, but Wickremesinghe is not. He's promising to crack down on them. So naturally, the SLPP MPs voted for Wickremesinghe. And the reaction is on your screen. Demonstrations outside the presidential mansion. Last time this happened, the president had to flee the country. In fact, he's still on the run. How can Ranil Wickremesinghe avoid a repeat? By implementing political reform. He may have been elected by the Rajapaksas party, in fact, but he needs to rise above politics. First, convene an all-party government. Second, begin work on curbing the president's powers. And finally, announce fresh elections, not today or tomorrow, maybe once the IMF bailout is here. Only a new mandate can diffuse tensions in Sri Lanka, it seems. Because right now, the people have been left out. They've had no say in this presidential election. Wickremesinghe has proven himself to be a great politician. He went from election defeat to president in 2 years straight. But can he be a great statesman? That will determine Sri Lanka's future. And talking about leaders, the British Conservative Party is looking for one. They're looking for a leader. They have to pick their next Prime Minister. Today they narrowed down their search to two candidates, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. They will be facing off against each other in the final runoff. Sunak has led the race so far, but an opinion poll now claims that he could lose the final vote. Our next report has the details.
It was Boris Johnson's last chance to take questions in Parliament as Prime Minister. After the usual sparring with the opposition, he wrapped up with some advice for his successor.
I want to use the last few seconds, Mr. Speaker, to give some words of advice to my successor, whoever he or she may be. Number one, stay close to the Americans, stick up for the Ukrainians, stick up for freedom and democracy everywhere. Cut taxes and deregulate wherever you can to make this the greatest place to live and invest, which it is. And Mr. Speaker, I want to thank everybody here and hasta la vista, baby. Thank you.
Here's the man hoping to replace him, Rishi Sunak, Johnson's former Secretary of Treasury. Sunak launched his bid with much fanfare. In his initial pitch, Sunak promised a better future for all Brits.
Do we confront this moment with honesty, seriousness and determination? Or do we tell ourselves comforting fairy tales?
And when it came to facing his rivals, Sunak didn't pull his punches.
Let's be clear, we have inflation because of our monetary policy, that we haven't been tough enough on the monetary supply. That's the way I would address that issue. Okay. But it is wrong.
Interest rates up, mortgages nightmare.
It is.
Liz, we have to be honest. We have to be honest. But borrowing your way out of inflation isn't a plan, it's a fairy tale.
Sunak's message is working. He has led the leadership race so far.
Sunak, 118 votes.
Conservative MPs have been voting to pick the final contenders. The race started with 8 candidates. Just 2 of them will make it to the ballot. Sunak is guaranteed a place in the final runoff, but his victory is far from certain. A poll has predicted that Sunak will lose the runoff. In the final round, all members of the Conservative Party will vote, and Sunak doesn't seem to be their favourite. Against all other candidates, he stands to lose big time. Kemi Badenoch, Liz Truss and Penny Mordaunt, they all poll better than Rishi Sunak. These 3 leaders can secure more than 50% of the votes. Less than 40% of the voters want Rishi Sunak as the next Prime Minister. Can Sunak turn his fortunes around? Conservative Party members will cast their votes over the summer. The results will be declared in September. So Sunak has the time for one final push. But he has a mountain to climb if he wants to win the Conservative Party election.
Let's turn our attention to China now. Xi Jinping faces a leadership contest later this year, but that election will be a farce. President Xi is guaranteed a record third term. What could spoil his party is the Wuhan virus. China has still not been able to contain its worst outbreak yet. Lockdowns are still in place in several areas. I have some numbers from last week. At least 30 million people still cannot move around in China. They remain under some form of pandemic restrictions. Beijing has refused to give up zero COVID. Chinese officials have been asked to crush new infections completely. They're now resorting to more draconian measures. Look at these images. What do you think this is? Chinese officials call them electronic monitoring wristbands. The Chinese citizens call them electronic handcuffs. Those under home quarantine in Beijing are being forced to wear this band. And these are not patients of the Wuhan virus. These are healthy individuals. They are being kept under watch because that's the favorite hobby of the Chinese state, keeping tabs. They want to monitor everyone, so everyone must wear a wristband. What will these bands do? Monitor a person's body temperature 24/7. That's how paranoid the Chinese state is. It wants to know if someone has a fever in real time. Now, some Chinese citizens have written about their experience on Weibo. It's a Chinese social media platform, Weibo, and these citizens have been protesting against these electronic handcuffs. I have one account from Beijing. This is what a resident of Beijing has shared on social media. And let me read it out for you. This is what it says. Last week, I went on a work trip to Guangzhou, and before I returned to Beijing, I did the nucleic acid tests in time. I also reported my home isolation to authorities and received the antigen tests. In the middle of the night, I then received a notification from my community that they're giving me an electric bracelet to wear. If they need to monitor my health, I'll cooperate with temperature checks and nucleic acid tests at the door, but I cannot accept this so-called 24-hour electronic monitoring. We do hope this person is safe after having said what he did. Now, what happens if someone is indeed infected by the Wuhan virus in a community? Well, they face the worst. Chinese officials resort to violent measures sometimes. They break into homes. I'm not making this up. This happened in China's Guangzhou city. Officials broke into 84 homes. You heard that right, 84 homes. These homes were of people who were taken to a quarantine hotel. After they left, Chinese officials broke in. What for? To check if there was any quote-unquote close contact left behind. These officials wanted to make sure no one was hiding or trying to escape quarantine. It seems like they did not find anyone, so they disinfected the homes and left. But this action has drawn a sharp response, as it should. Officials in Guangzhou faced a strong backlash. They were criticized for breaking into homes. How is the Chinese state responding? They're now installing new locks at these homes. Not sure if that helps. The pattern is clear and punishing. In order to push zero COVID, China has turned homes into jails and patients into criminals. Rich Chinese citizens have had enough. Nearly 10,000 of them are looking to leave. Do you know their combined net worth? A whopping $48 billion. They want to go, but they can't. What's stopping them? The Chinese government. There is no official ban on immigration, but Beijing is making it harder for people to leave. Passport processing times have increased in China. The process to get a passport has become more difficult. Officials demand more documents. Even moving money is tough. Chinese citizens with a high net worth now have few avenues to move cash outside the mainland. And every transaction they make is carefully watched by Beijing. What does all of this tell you? In China, if you have money, you're under watch. If you have the virus, you're under watch. If you run a temperature, you're under watch. If you've traveled, you're under watch, and you cannot run or hide. Let's turn to Europe now. It is in the grip of a climate emergency. Temperatures are breaking records. Heat waves are claiming lives. Wildfires are scorching thousands of hectares of land, and the death toll is humongous. In Spain, 510 people have died due to the heat. In Portugal, more than 1,000 lives have been lost. Now, the crisis may be unfolding in Europe, but the effects are being felt across the world, including in the US, where Joe Biden is now under pressure from his senators to declare a climate emergency. Here's a report.
Europe is in the grip of a climate emergency. Temperatures are soaring, wildfires are spreading. People are dying. In Spain, the temperature has reached as high as 45 degrees Celsius. Wildfires have spread to residential areas. Trains were seen traveling through a raging blaze. Firefighters were seen risking their lives. The death toll is rising. At least 510 people have died due to heat-related issues. The Spanish government has declared the situation a real environmental tragedy.
The urgency these days is the drama of seeing the countryside burn, of seeing the forest burn. This is a real environmental tragedy. But above all, when there are human losses, this is a tragedy that is irreparable.
In France, things are no better. Wildfires have engulfed 11,000 hectares of land and forced over 37,000 people to run for their lives. The highways are filled with fire trucks, the skies are lined with fire planes, but the forests are still in flame. French President Macron says this could be the worst tragedy in recent history.
We are currently experiencing a one-of-a-kind season in terms of difficulty. We have already seen thrice the amount of forests that have burned compared to 2020.
In Italy, the situation is equally dire. There's a scorching heat wave and the worst drought in 70 years. It has only aggravated wildfires. Last week, the temperature in Sicily rose to 48.8 degrees. This is believed to be a new European record. Authorities say the worst is yet to come. In Portugal, the situation is even worse. Wildfires have spilled over to roads. Temperatures have soared to 47 degrees, and over 1,000 people have died in the heat wave.
It's a shock to the system, but nature has a way of coming back. I'm sure it'll all return. But I will cut back these dead trees and shrubs and everything.
In the United Kingdom, the heat wave is melting train tracks and tarmacs. Fire incidents are being reported even in London. On Wednesday, they left a residential area in flames. The London Fire Brigade says Tuesday was its busiest day since World War II.
Some of the fires today have required more than 30 fire engines. Some have required 20 fire engines. Some have required 15 fire engines. It's simply not possible for the London Fire Brigade to respond to all of these fires if they continue at this pace.
Given the scale of the crisis, most European nations have declared a state of emergency. Thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C., Joe Biden is under pressure to do something similar. On Monday, Senate Democrats urged Biden to declare a climate emergency and ramp up production of renewable energy products. They want America to be on the offensive and take aggressive steps against climate change. Is their president prepared to take the lead? If yes, he may be the first American president to launch a good war. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The 1960s. It was an exciting time around the world, a decade of revolution, a decade of the Beatles. But here in India, the mood was very different. India fought two major wars in that decade. Famines were being reported across the country. It was nervous times for the young Asian democracy. Remember, this is the 1960s we're talking about, just the third decade of India's independence. It was also a decade in which India lost some of its tallest figures. Tonight, we're focusing on two of them, Lal Bahadur Shastri and Homi J. Bhabha. Neither of them need any introduction. Shastri was India's second Prime Minister, the man who led India to victory in the 1965 war against Pakistan. Everyone knows his famous slogan, Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan. Homi J. Bhabha was the father of India's nuclear program. He dreamt of creating a nuclear bomb for India. They were radically different men. Shastri was more conservative, a salt of the earth kind of person, while Bhabha was more flamboyant, a proper man of science. Do you know what both men had in common? An untimely death. Lal Bahadur Shastri died on January 11, 1966. He was in Tashkent, signing a peace treaty with Pakistan. Homi Bhabha died on January 24, 1966. He was the victim of a plane crash near the Alps. Their deaths were separated by just 13 days. And theories have surrounded both incidents, conspiracy theories. And guess what's common in all of them? A foreign hand. A new book has given those theories a new lease of life. It's called Conversations with the Crow, written by journalist Gregory Douglas. What does this book say? It is basically a compilation of interviews with Robert T. Crowley. He was the second in command of the CIA's Directorate of Operations. We're talking about the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, America's foreign espionage wing. Back in the 1960s, the CIA was running operations everywhere in the world. Remember, it was the height of the Cold War, and India was a non-aligned country. In this book, Crowley admits the CIA's role in Shastri and Bhabha's death. This is very significant. I'll read out some of the excerpts for you. This is what he said. We could have blown it up over Vienna, but we decided the high mountains were much better for the bits and pieces to come down on. Blown up what? Crowley was asked about Bhabha's plane crash. That's when he gave this incriminating answer. In fact, the full conversation is unbearably heartless. Listen to this. The journalist asked, how many people went down with Bhabha? And this is Crowley's reply. Who knows? And frankly, who cares? This is the second in command in the CIA. He also admitted something similar about Shastri. Let me quote again. We nailed Shastri as well. Believe me, they were close to getting the bomb. And so what if they nuked their deadly Palki enemies? Maybe they could nuke the Panama Canal or Los Angeles. Nailed Shastri, he said. That's what the CIA's Robert Crowley said. Now, officially, the US government denies any responsibility. These are just claims of one man. Having said that, they raise important questions. For example, the timing. 3 months before his death, Homi Bhabha made a radio address. He said he could make the bomb in 18 months. All he needed was a go-ahead from the government. Did Shastri support him? Public records say he did not. Lal Bahadur Shastri was a staunch Gandhian. He was opposed to the idea of nuclear destruction. Yet, the times were changing around him. India had fought 2 wars in 4 years. The one against China had ended in defeat. And in 1964, China went one step ahead. They conducted their first nuclear weapon test. India was being surrounded by nuclear and hostile states, so people were warming up to the idea of nukes. Could this have prompted the CIA to retaliate? Perhaps assassinate Shastri and Bhabha? It fits with the CIA's modus operandi. They have a history of neutralizing political opponents. They tried to kill Cuba's Fidel Castro, Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, Serbia's Slobodan Milosevic, and Iraq's Saddam Hussein. So it is certainly possible. But so far there is no evidence. Multiple government investigations have found no proof of foul play, yet this book changes the equation and changes it significantly. Perhaps they're the mindless ramblings of a retired American spy, but they're surely worth investigating. Our last story tonight is for space buffs. In September this year, NASA will execute an exciting mission. Dangerous but exciting. It will try to change an asteroid's orbit, deflect it through kinetic impact. The name of this mission is DART, short for the Double Asteroid Redirection Test, DART. This test will help NASA develop the world's first planetary defense system, a system to prevent the Earth or save the Earth from a catastrophic event. Here's more.
66 million years ago, A giant asteroid's impact is said to have caused the mass extinction of dinosaurs. Today, there is no potential harm from an asteroid to Earth, but it's still important to keep our defense system ready in order to prevent another catastrophic event. With this aim in mind, NASA has launched a new mission called DART, the Double Asteroid Redirection Test, the world's first planetary defense test mission. This mission will demonstrate asteroid deflection, changing an asteroid's motion through kinetic impact. In simple words, it will collide with an asteroid and deflect it from its orbit. This will provide scientists valuable information for developing a planetary defense system. Here's how the mission will play out. In September this year, DART will collide with Dimorphos, an asteroid measuring 160 meters in diameter and located 11 million kilometers from Earth. This asteroid is basically a moon orbiting a larger asteroid. The mission will change its trajectory to avoid a potential collision. It will hit Dimorphos at a speed of 24,000 kilometers per hour. Since neither its composition nor shape is known, the effects of the impact will be observed by a small satellite, which will be deployed a few days before. The question is, does this asteroid really pose a threat? Not really. Scientists say none of the 27,500 asteroids near Earth pose a threat. However, they are only aware of 40% of the asteroids around Earth. There could be millions more. So NASA hopes this mission will prepare it for the day when an undiscovered asteroid poses a threat to our planet. That said, this mission also runs certain risks. It may help change an asteroid's orbit, but it could also fragment it into smaller craters, the consequences of which could be disastrous. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.
Di qua, grazie. Di qua.